What makes a room great? Most of us have some kind of a checklist in our heads for this. Maybe it's high-end furniture, maybe it's well-curated decor, or maybe it's just a big budget. Because if you spend enough money, the room has to be great, right? Have you ever walked into a room that had all that stuff, but something still felt off? Or how about a tiny, simple room that felt more comfortable than a big, lavish one? Here's the surprising truth. All great rooms share one thing, and isn't the style, the furniture, or the money spent. It's this. All great rooms are easy to read. And in this video, I'm going to explain why. But first, what do I mean by a room that's easy to read? Well, an easy to read room is one you understand instantly, like you're reading a clear sentence. When you step inside, you don't hesitate or feel lost. You're not scanning around wondering, where do I go and where should I sit? No. Instead, everything about the space quietly tells you what it is and how to use it. Nothing in the room is confusing or fighting for your attention in a bad way, and the layout, furniture, and decor communicate their purpose clearly. That's what allows you to walk in and relax because your brain isn't working overtime to figure the room out. But before we get deep into this, I need to address a common misconception in interior design, which is that if it looks good, it works. Because so many people tend to believe that a beautiful room automatically equals a comfortable room. But that's often not true, because even a beautiful room can feel awkward if it's not clear and functional. So a room isn't great just because it looks great, it needs to feel great too. And that's why, when designing your space, you want to put function and comfort before aesthetics. I mean, a room can be beautifully styled and still fail if it makes people uneasy. So if you've ever been in a pretty room that somehow felt cold, confusing, or just off, you've experienced this firsthand, because that room was missing that easy readability that truly great rooms have. So with that in mind, let's talk about exactly what makes a room readable and effortless to be in. And to make this as easy to understand as possible, I want to break it down into 5 key components of clarity. These are like the ingredients that all work together to create that easy, welcoming feeling that great rooms have. So the foundation of a readable room is its layout, because before you think about colors or furniture or lighting, a room has to answer one basic question. How do I move through here? Because highly readable rooms make movement feel effortless. You walk in and your body already knows what to do, where to step, where to pause, and where to sit. There's no zigzagging around furniture, no sidestepping a coffee table that's 2 inches too close, and no detours around some oversized chair you bought just because it was on sale. You're not brushing the corner of the couch trying to get to the kitchen. The path is just obvious. But that ease isn't just about avoiding obstacles. It's about setting the tone for how the room wants to be used. Because a great layout quietly suggests what should happen in that space. For example, a pair of chairs angled toward each other says, this is a place to sit and talk. A sectional that wraps around a coffee table says, this is a place to hang out. And even the space between things matters, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. But when a layout works, you don't notice it. You just use the room the way it was meant to be used. And here's a mistake a lot of people make. They assume pushing everything against the walls will make the space feel bigger. But what it actually does is create this weird, empty void in the middle of your room, and it leaves people unsure of where they're supposed to go. So instead, floating your furniture, even if it's just a sofa pulled 6 inches off the wall, creates a much clearer sense of flow. It carves out specific zones in the room and guides your body through the space instead of forcing you to orbit around the edges, because movement is behavior. And a well-designed layout doesn't just help you walk through a room, it shapes how you live in it. It nudges you into conversation, invites you to sit, and guides you to connect without hesitation. Because that's what clarity of movement really is, a room that teaches you how to behave in it without ever having to explain. Now, after you know how to move through a room, the next question the room needs to answer is just as important, which is, where do I sit? Because the truth is, most people will never ask this out loud. If a guest walks into your living room and they can't immediately tell where to sit, they'll either hesitate awkwardly or pick the most neutral option, which is often the least comfortable one. They might hover by the door, perch themselves on the edge of something, or just wait for your command. And that's not a design win. that's a room that didn't do its job. Because highly readable rooms make seating obvious, not in a heavy-handed way, just in a way that feels natural. You see a sofa with a coffee table in front and a side chair angled toward it, and you don't have to think. You just plop down and start talking. A chair under a lamp with a little table nearby says, "This is a reading spot." And a bench at the end of the bed says, "You can pause here." It's quiet, but still clear. Now, of course, seating isn't just about quantity, it's about arrangement. You can have 6 chairs in a room and still no good place to sit if they're all spaced too far apart or floating aimlessly with no visual connection. But on the other hand, 3 seats grouped thoughtfully together can feel instantly usable. So people naturally gravitate to arrangements that make sense for conversation, rest, or focus. And a great room supports that without needing to be explained. But here's where this often breaks down: when your furniture looks too precious or too performative. If a chair looks like part of a magazine spread, it's perfectly styled with 5 throw pillows and a fur draped over the arm, people will instinctively avoid it because they don't want to mess it up. They don't want to be wrong. And so it stops being a seat and starts being a display. And whether they realize it or not, most people will just stand there awkwardly rather than risk sitting in the wrong spot. So if you want your room to feel usable, you have to make it look usable. And that doesn't mean stripping away style. It just means editing the performative stuff that's sending mixed signals. A beautiful chair that actually invites someone to sit is doing its job. But if people need to ask your permission before sitting down, your room isn't nearly as readable as it should be. Now, once someone knows how to move through the room and where to sit, the next question their brain is asking, without even realizing it, where do I look? Because in a well-designed room, your eyes know exactly where to land first. You're not scanning around trying to figure out what's going on. No, there's a clear focal point, and everything else plays a supporting role. But in a room without that clarity, everything fights for your attention. The big piece of art competes with the bright rug, which competes with the patterned curtains, which compete with a bunch of random objects sitting on every surface. And when everything is loud, nothing gets heard. So your eye doesn't land anywhere in the room, it just bounces around like a toddler in a toy store. And that's what makes a space feel visually chaotic, even if it's full of individually beautiful things. But in a highly readable room, 1 or 2 elements lead, and the rest quiet down to let them do their job. So that might be a fireplace, a window with a view, a bold piece of art, or even just a great coffee table in the center of the room. And then the rest of the space organizes itself around that one moment. And that is what creates harmony. That's what makes a space feel composed, not crowded. So here's something you can do right now. Take a step back from your room and ask yourself where your eyes land first. If you're not sure, or worse, they kind of land everywhere, then the hierarchy of the room probably needs work. So try removing one thing. Not everything, just one. Simplify a corner, pull some clutter off the shelves, or remove something loud so something else can shine. The goal here isn't to make the room boring, it's to give your eyes a chance to rest. Because great rooms don't demand your attention, they guide it. And when you've got a strong visual hierarchy in your space, your brain stops working overtime and the room just makes sense. Now, even if the layout's working and the seating makes sense and your eye knows where to land, all of that can fall apart the second the sun goes down if your lighting doesn't hold up. Because readability isn't just a daytime thing. A great room also needs to make sense well after dark. It should still guide you and feel good to be in, whether it's 10 a.m. or 10 p.m., and the only way that happens is with lighting that's actually been thought through. So my subscribers won't be surprised to hear this, but readable rooms are lit in layers. Not one overhead light that blasts the whole room with a single harsh glow, and not just a few decorative lamps that look nice but don't actually light anything. I'm talking about actual layers. Ambient lighting, task lighting, and something a little softer for atmosphere. That's how a room stays clear and comfortable from morning to night. But what does it actually mean to be lit in layers? Well, during the day, it might mean sunlight pouring in through the windows with sheer curtains that let the light through but minimize the glare. And that's certainly a nice vibe, at least while the sun is up. But once the sun goes down, the feeling of your room will change. And the key is, you don't want to flip on a ceiling light and suddenly feel like you're under an airport security scanner. I mean, nothing says welcome home like fluorescent trauma, am I right? But really, you want the room to shift with the light, to dim down, soften up, and keep working the way it did during the day. So here's a simple fix anyone can pull off. Add one more lamp. Just one. Because most rooms don't have enough sources of light, and that's usually one of their major problems. But by adding another lamp, you add one more layer of light that you didn't have before. And whether it's a floor lamp, a table lamp, or even a clip-on spotlight, just do whatever you're able to that works in your space. The point is to give the room more than one option. Because lighting isn't just about being able to see, it's about directing attention, shaping the mood of the room, and making the space feel alive all hours of the day. Because just like with layout, when lighting is done right, you don't notice it. You just notice that the room feels great. But when it's done wrong, the whole room suddenly feels cold or confusing, and you might not be sure why. So that's why having layered lighting matters. Because a good lighting plan teaches your eyes how to move and your body how to feel, no matter what time it is. So now we get to the part that most people think is everything in interior design, and that's the stuff. And don't get me wrong, the stuff in your home matters, but in a highly readable room, it's not just about what's in your space, it's about why it's there. Because every object in the room is sending a signal, and that signal is either reinforcing the room's purpose, or it's pulling against it. And when a room feels great, it's usually because the objects in it feel intentional. The bookshelf isn't just a place to store books, it tells you something about the person who lives there. The blanket draped over the arm of the sofa isn't just for aesthetics, it's there because someone actually uses it to curl up at night. And so, the objects feel like part of a life being lived, not just decorations that were placed there for their looks. But when a room feels noisy or scattered, it's usually because the objects aren't playing on the same team. A Roman bust sitting between a leopard print and a planter that looks like an upside-down light bulb? Yeah, this kind of setup doesn't tell a story, it just creates friction. Your eye starts asking questions the room can't answer, and that's the opposite of clarity. So here's an easy exercise. Pick one surface in your room and edit it down to 3 objects. That's it. Pick your favorite 3 things on that shelf or table and take everything else off just to see how it feels. Because when you strip it back, the best stuff now has room to breathe, and the room becomes both easier to see and easier to understand. Now, this doesn't mean every object in a great room needs to be perfectly styled or match a particular color scheme. It just means everything has a role. It supports how you want the room to function or how you want it to feel, or ideally, both. Because if it doesn't do either of those things, it's probably just adding noise. Now, to be clear, this isn't about minimalism or perfection. It's not about having less for the sake of aesthetics. It's about making sure your room isn't sending mixed signals. You don't want your space to feel like a storage unit or a random gallery of stuff. You want it to feel like a space that was designed that way on purpose. Because when what's in the room lines up with what the room is for, people get it. You walk in and instantly understand, oh, this is a calm little reading room. This is where people hang out and have fun. And that's what makes a space feel deeply understood. So when these 5 components, layout, seating, visual hierarchy, lighting, and objects, all come together, your room achieves that easy readability. And you might not consciously point out each factor, but you feel the result where everything in the room works in harmony. You move through the room seamlessly, you feel drawn to the right spots, and you don't get distracted by clutter. It just feels effortless. And it's that effortlessness that's the hallmark of a great room. So the big takeaway for me here is this. A room can have designer furniture, trendy colors, and fancy finishes, but if it doesn't feel natural to be in, it's not a truly great room. But when you start thinking of your space like a story or a piece of music, something that should flow and not jar the senses, you start to see what really matters. It's not about impressing anyone with flashy decor or a perfect look. It's about creating a space where everything clicks into place for you and your guests. Because great rooms don't impress you, they relax you. They invite you in, make you feel at home, and give you the space to be yourself. So next time you're working on one of your own rooms, don't just ask, how will this look? But also ask, how will this feel? Because if you aim for that easy readability, that effortlessness, you'll be well on your way to a room that isn't just great in photos, but great to live in every single day. So if you appreciate the way I approach design, share this video with someone you know who also deserves a great room in their home. And if you want to dive deeper into these ideas, click the link in the description and drop in your email. Some of my best stuff only gets shared with my email subscribers, so you don't want to miss it. And now that you know what makes a great room, it's time to zoom out and master the decisions that'll have the biggest impact on your home as a whole. So watch this video next, where I'll walk you through a framework that'll help you upgrade your entire home with as little effort as possible.